episode 11. We're flying now. We're full on in the double digits. Yeah, it's happening. It's happening. If you haven't had a chance yet to listen to the previous episode with Ruben, it was a good one. It was a lot of fun. I recommend you jump back and check that out. If you do go listen to it, we tried to balance the sounds as much as we could, but you know, it's fun. We're learning. And sorry about the subscribe sound that I put in, like Mario coins collection. I know it gave some people a bit of a fright. That's my bad. I promise to be better with that. But yeah, I think let's kick off episode 11. I think Tev will start us off today.
Yeah, as you guys know, the first section in our podcast is something we called News from Around the World. So in light of it being World Cup time happening, last week was our special on the World Cup. We spoke about the teams, we spoke about our predictions, and really just focused on the football side of things. And we'd be remiss of us to not speak about the other side of it, which is obviously the politics, the logistical, all of those parts that make up the running of the World Cup. And obviously this is a very landmark World Cup. It's the first in an Arab country or in the Middle East. So very similar when it was in the 2010 World Cup. But this time, this is the first time that a World Cup is being held in an Arab country, and secondly, in a nation that is of Islamic faith. So that comes with a few more rules, regulations. The first of which is very notable, and it's seen a lot of comments, a lot of feedback, and a lot of backlash, and that is on the human rights grounds. So there's been an objection from many parties related to the FIFA World Cup for it being in a country that criminalizes the LGBTQ plus community and its treatment towards women. Yeah, very notable point. We obviously know that this is a very contentious issue, and it's one of the reasons that we've seen quite a few people boycotting the World Cup. I think the most notable or prominent figures to speak out about Qatar and the World Cup and how politics don't mix was the French President Macron, who believes that sports and politics shouldn't mix. So let's start with that. Let me get your opinion on, firstly, just that statement. I know it's come up a lot, not just in football, but in all other spheres of sport. What do you make of the statement, sports and politics shouldn't mix?
So you and I have spoken about this on different occasions, maybe not necessarily politics, but we've spoken about like the role of celebrities, you know, if you know anyone wants to go, episode 3 I think is the one we spoke about that, and yeah, I guess this is a similar kind of thing. It's quite a tricky situation because on the one hand, I kind of agree with what Macron is saying in that sense that it's not necessarily something that it's not necessary that sports and politics should mix all the time. But having said that, I also think that people that are any position, not just sportsmen, anyone that has the space where people will listen to them and where they hold an influence, I believe you should use, not all the time, but you can use that or should use that platform to speak about things that matter. So like in the same token where we spoke about Kyrie Irving, how he shouldn't use the platform to boost anti-Semitic documentaries like he did.
Yeah.
In the same token, I do believe that there's a space for these things to be addressed. Having said that, I don't really know, you know, to what extent this is supposed to go. Like, how far? There were some people that were saying Gareth Southgate should have pulled England out of the World Cup. Now, that just seems ridiculous to me. If I don't know, like, it's not there. It's not. All these football players have this dream to go play in the World Cup, you know, and it's not, they shouldn't be held, you know, at ransom for what's going on there. And just, you know, like with the LGBTQ plus thing, I think that there's a lot of so the whole thing is like they were saying that people won't be punished, people can express themselves as they feel fit, you know, like people can hold hands, but they also just need to respect the culture in Qatar, which to an extent, of course, that makes sense as well, but I do think what is happening at the moment is quite cool. Like, England, Harry Kane has come out and said he will wear the armband, the rainbow flag armband. Gareth Bale said the same thing. England actually came in a plane that was called Over the Rainbow, and on the tail it had the LGBTQ plus flag. And I think doing stuff like that, I think, is good. But I do think it is quite tricky in general. What are your thoughts? Like, do you think in terms of like sports and politics and mixing it, what are your opinions?
I think there's always going to be an overlap with sports and politics. Also because sport isn't an isolated silo, it's still part of a greater business ultimately. And we see that business more often than not comes first before any kind of social justice or social integrity, more often than not. I think it's very interesting that England and Wales have taken that approach. I completely understand making awareness the kind of platform that they use to educate everybody around these issues, people being marginalized, etc. It is tricky because you also need to understand that in an Islamic nation, that they have their rules and regulations, and it's, I think to an extent, it's also a bit unfair to try and impose that on them. I mean, they're essentially welcoming other nations into their country, and they've said, look, these are our laws, these are our customs, this is what you guys need to be wary of. It. I think it's different had they invited everybody in, and then once everybody was at the World Cup, and then they were kind of coming out of the laws to say, okay, you're being fined £1,000 because there's no hand holding in public, and people were completely unaware of this and didn't know what was going on. So I think it is a very tricky thing to kind of balance out and see all sides absolute. Like, there seems to be a lot more gray area in this kind of conversation. And I think the second point I'd bring in is, I think there's it's a bit unfair from the Western world trying to paint this World Cup as the worst World Cup ever. I mean, we haven't even gotten started with the actual World Cup. I know there was a lot, and notably so, things that happened in the lead up to the World Cup. The migrants' death, which we'll touch on as one of the other reasons that people wanted to boycott, along with the alcohol rules that I think they did a 360 on. So obviously they have the naming partner Budweiser, who were the only or the sole distributor of alcohol at the venues, and that's, I think, been revoked in the 11th hour. But funny enough, it's still available for premium hospitality members. Everyone that's in the general seating at the matches, you're not allowed, or alcohol is prohibited, any kind of sale to the general public. But as soon as you've elevated yourself into the hierarchy of hospitality, suddenly you're open to a few more privileges, which is, I find, very ironic. I think you need to have a stance, and if you've drawn the line at alcohol will not be sold at venues because of these reasons, then stick to that, rooted in that. You can't then be well, if you give me an extra £20,000, then I'll make some.
I was listening, and I think if you do have the time to listen to it, the BBC podcast, they do like a whole, every day they're actually doing a World Cup daily episode, and I'm finding it very interesting because they're also doing the same thing. They're touching on football and the matters like the these human rights matters at the same time. But this thing of them changing the rules for the alcohol at the 11th hour, one of the big problems that people have is that it's not necessarily the prohibiting the sale of alcohol or choosing who gets to buy and who not. But they didn't really discuss it with anyone. They just made the announcement, and now this is the new rule. And a lot of people are concerned that, like, okay, so for example, you've now said that it's okay for me as a whoever, let's say the LGBTQ plus community that is attending the World Cup, you said it's okay for them to hold hands and show affection to a certain amount. What happens if they make a 360 on those decisions as well, just like they've done with the alcohol? And I think a lot of people are like, they're not so sure whether, they're already skeptical about whether or not to go. And the fact that they're changing quite a big thing as well, to be fair, this late, I think that's also concerning people, that they can just flip their stance just like that.
Yeah. And I think, people need to be held in account for this. So there needs to be clear distinction, and it kind of has to be a breakdown of all of this in black and white, that both has been signed off by the government, by FIFA, and can be distributed to media and the public alike. So you know exactly, almost like a bullet point. Like, these are the rules and regulations. Even if it's like a 10-page document that's been made public, now everyone has the physical black and white. I know exactly the perimeters or the grounds in which I can operate should I go to Qatar for it. So there's a lot to touch on with the migrant workers. I believe it was 6,500 migrant workers that died in preparation for this World Cup. Which is an astounding amount, honestly. What are the conditions? And they touched on this briefly. I don't know if you saw the FIFA Uncovered documentary on Netflix.
It's on my list, but...
So I watched it recently, and it discusses how FIFA ordinarily was just a sporting body. So it had select few nations who played in the World Cup, and I think it was from 94 when FIFA adjusted its perception to not just be a body, but to be a profitable company. So it talks through the deals with Adidas, with Coca-Cola, with the alcohol brands like Budweiser, and how they kept adjusting their business, their mission, their values, in order to become a very profitable business. So it's really interesting to see just how they operate between running of a business versus, again, like we touched on, the ethics and the human side of things. And I'm not sure what his name is, but he was one of the heads of the Qatar bids. So his response to the migrant workers that have passed away, he firstly said that the figure has been
bloated,
amplified,
exaggerated
greatly from what it was. I think his numbers were around 35 that died directly in the construction of the stadiums, and another 35 in and around the nation. So it wasn't necessarily with the construction of stadiums. And he said that the nation cannot be held accountable for a private company's running of their business. So giving them judgment as opposed to the specific company whose responsibility it is to look after its workers. So it being a private company that got the tender or the deal or whatever it is, they are the ones that need to be held accountable firstly and foremost. Before
I think one of the arguments though against that is kind of like, you firstly, as you know, we know within these countries, all countries actually, the government definitely has a right to set labor laws, right? So that's the one thing, is that people are like, okay, yeah, but you can blame the companies, but then you have two things to answer to. One, were these companies in violation of your country's labor laws? And if so, they should be held accountable by you as a country, Qatar. Yeah. Two, if they are not, let's say you don't have clear labor laws, then as a country, you shouldn't be giving the tenders to companies that are committing what's essentially called, they're calling it indentured labor, which is essentially just a modern term for slavery, like, because they're saying that the people that died were working in horrific conditions. They were working in the heat, which, by the way, the players can't even, apparently these stadiums are so like state of the art that it's like air conditioned. So it's kind of like, these professionals can't play football for 90 minutes in the heat, but you can expect people to work in that heat. And this is now summer when they were working, obviously, as well. So
Yeah.
I think that's the argument against that. Is like, okay, but what are Qatar's laws? What are protecting these people? And if you're saying, okay, well, why are you holding Qatar responsible? You should talk to the company. It's like, yeah, but you gave them the tender. You chose that company. So it feels, I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers, because I also read that he was saying like, people were taking a whole bunch of unrelated people that maybe were working on the stadiums, but they died of like an illness or they died in a car accident, and they were taking people that they were adding those numbers, lumping it all together. And he was saying, in the context of that, I wouldn't be too shocked to learn stuff like that, but to blame the companies, I don't know. For me, that doesn't work for me. But that's just me, man.
Yeah, I think everyone needs to be held accountable for matters like this. It's people's lives that you're dealing with here. It's not like, this is a contract for sweets or alcohol. As important as that is, it doesn't amount to the cost of a life. So that is something that honestly needs to be taken with more severity, and people need to own up to things like this. I don't know how you feel about the World Cup. Has any of the news, the stories, the lead up to it deterred you from, firstly, watching the World Cup? Secondly, are you quite conflicted if you are watching the World Cup? Kind of, what's the position that you feel?
It's a very tricky thing, to be honest with you. Like, man, I love the World Cup. I love it. I think it's such a cool thing. Like, I really do. I think it's so tricky. I am conflicted. I am a little bit conflicted about watching it, to be honest with you. I think I still am going to. I'm not going to lie. I think I'm still going to watch the World Cup. But it's not an easy decision, and some people will turn around and be like, oh yeah, like the same thing of a meat argument. Like, oh, like if I don't eat the cow, who's like someone else just will. Kind of like, what difference does it make if I don't watch? I don't necessarily agree with that, but I am a bit conflicted about this one. Having said that, we spoke about in the episode with Ruben, and he was saying that it's lacking that feeling that a World Cup usually has. I don't think I'm going to watch Ecuador and Qatar play, if I'm honest with you. Like, I might skip that match, but I do feel excited now for it. I do. I'm not going to lie. I do feel excited, and it's it's tricky. It's tricky. How about you? Do you feel conflicted, or how do you feel?
Definitely.
And maybe this can be our wrap-up question.
Yeah, definitely. Quite conflicted. We look for social justice, and we are advocates of social justice. I'd go that far as saying that. And like you, I've kind of centered my sporting world and interest and hobbies around football, and this is one of those distinctive tournaments that come around, and you always have eyes for it. I mean, it's the one time that you see your footballing stars possibly achieve the unachievable. And there is a lot of conflict around this. I think for me, there's also, this World Cup feels like it's a bit more scrutiny against it. And there are some grounds for it. I think it's also a bit too scrutinized to some extent. Because if I take the 2010 World Cup as an example, the first in Africa, I don't think there was as much scrutiny around this. And in that documentary, they actually talk about how these bids came about. So 2010, 2018, and 2022. They don't touch too much on the Brazil one in 2014. But they do say that South Africa one was bought because there's a definite hierarchy when it comes to votes of the FIFA what do I call it? The bases around the world. So obviously you have UEFA, that's Europe. You have CONCACAF, that I think is the Americans. You have CONMEBOL, something like that.
Yeah.
That's your North Americas and the Pacifics. You have CAF, etc. So in order to get the swaying vote or the deciding vote, you had people at the top giving bribes in order to swing the vote. So
Okay.
yeah, I won't give too much detail. People should just go and watch it. Very interesting. You can get a lot of insight into it. But I don't feel that even the South African World Cup had this much scrutiny, maybe because we didn't have as much media outlets as what we see in this day and age. But I don't know if it's my inclination that because it's the Western world looking at the East, they just feel like there's a lot more scrutiny.
It is also tricky though, like, because the climate that we live in, there's a lot more attention to this kind of thing. And funny enough, I was actually saying to Katya this morning, like, if anything, the fact that these conversations are happening to this degree is a positive thing, right? The fact that we're having these conversations again on this kind of platform or just amongst each other. But it's the same thing with like TV shows like The Office, for example. Steve Carell came out and he's like, there's no way The Office could come out now and be as successful based on the content of what it is. So it's like you're saying with the 2010 World Cup, it's just, it's the political climate is also based on the backdrop of what's happening in the world at this moment in time, how closely we are looking at these kinds of things. But, just, you're going to watch, right?
I am going to be paying some interest to the World Cup.
Yeah, it's so difficult as a lifelong football fan not to. It's difficult, and some people don't understand because they don't have the same kind of connection to football as us, and it's fine. Like I also don't like being in the position where I feel like I have to justify my choice to watch football. It just feels a bit. It's hard. It's tough. I think it is a tough one, to be honest with you. That's just my final thoughts on that. Yeah,
I think you've summed it up perfectly. That's the position I think a lot of us are in. Lots of conflict for sure, but I think even in viewing the World Cup, it won't just be the game. So everything is likely to be World Cup centered. So even the news, watching the news, there'll still be an involvement of the World Cup. So it'll be interesting to see everything that comes out of it, even beyond the football. So kind of see, last point I'll touch on is, did you see the fans? So there was big hype about who the fans are in Qatar to welcome their teams. And when people viewed or took a closer look of the fans, that they weren't actually people from those respective nations. So the article came out that says the Qataris are hiring Pakistani residents to be or pose as fans. So they get paid about $10 a day and they get 3 meals a day to pose as fans. So if you look at the photos, it'll be Team Argentina, Team Germany, Team Spain, whatever. And it's majority, a lot of Indian gents.
To what end? Like, what's the point?
I think it's to build hype, to build an anticipation. So before the actual, let me call them, the official supporters from these nations come in, kind of have like a welcome committee. So aside from the actual individuals that are working for FIFA or Qatar, whatever it is, to welcome the respective countries, you have people to build excitement, kind of get the hype for the tournament up. Yeah. Well,
people also spoke about the fact that Qatar's population is smaller than like London, and they're hosting a World Cup, so it doesn't surprise me that they would need some. I know that fans are arriving. I know the Red Army, the Welsh guys, are supposed to be arriving tomorrow. But yeah, like you said, the news will be surrounding that. But yeah, we'll keep a close eye on it, I'm sure.
Oh, most definitely. So again, guys, let us know your opinions. What do you feel about the World Cup? Are you going to be watching it? If not, what are your reasons?
Yeah.
Give us some insights. Tell us how you feel. Let us know. Don't forget we're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and obviously our website.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Do all the things. Do the super subscribe. And if you're dipping out, we thank you for joining us, and we'll be moving into section 2 of our podcast.